You know, in the absolutely cutthroat world of Hollywood, empires aren't just built, they're conquered. And for decades, one man sat on the throne, Sumner Redstone. We're talking about a kingdom worth billions, controlling massive names like Paramount, CBS, and MTV. But listen, this isn't some dry story about spreadsheets and stock prices. No, this is a raw, human drama about family, betrayal, and a battle for succession that played out like a Shakespearean tragedy, right in the boardrooms of New York and the mansions of LA.
I mean, just read that sentence. It's pulled directly from a 2016 lawsuit, and it basically set the stage for one of the most brutal corporate power struggles in modern history. The accusation was absolutely explosive, a palace coup, orchestrated not by a rival CEO, but by the king's own daughter. That single claim sent shockwaves right through the foundations of a massive media empire.
So that's the central question we're really digging into here. How did a man who clawed his way to the very top of the media world, a ruthless titan who never ever backed down from a fight, how did he find himself at the center of a battle that he just couldn't control? Well, to find the answer, we have to go back, way back to the beginning, to the rise of the titan himself.
Right. To understand the fall, you first have to understand the rise. Because before he was this ailing figure you read about in court documents, Sumner Redstone was a force of nature. He was a brilliant, just relentless businessman who had built this small family theater chain into an absolute global powerhouse.
Okay, so picture this. It's the early 90s. The multi-channel TV universe is just exploding. And suddenly, content isn't just king, it's everything. Owning a legendary Hollywood studio like Paramount, that was the ultimate prize. It wasn't just a studio, it was the key to a future media empire, and believe me, everybody wanted it.
The battle for Paramount, man, it became the stuff of legend on Wall Street. As you can see here, it started with a move from a Hollywood insider, Barry Diller. But then in the fall of '93, Sumner Redstone, who was seen as this tenacious but kind of outsider figure, he crashes the party with a counterbid. And what happened next wasn't a business negotiation. It was a months-long, no-holds-barred financial war that had the entire industry glued to their seats.
And this slide just captures that clash of styles perfectly. On one side, you've got Diller, the polished, suave Hollywood executive, and on the other, you've got Redstone, this bulldog from Boston who simply refused to lose. He wasn't just bidding for a company, he was fighting for his vision of a true media conglomerate, and he was willing to go to the mat for it.
And when he did. When all the dust finally settled in 1994, Redstone's Viacom had captured Paramount for a staggering $10 billion. This victory didn't just make him a player, it cemented his status as the new king of Hollywood, a titan who had totally outmaneuvered the establishment to claim his crown.
But, as any king knows, building an empire is one thing, holding it together is a whole other story. And even as he was celebrating his huge victory, deep within the Redstone dynasty, the seeds of a future conflict were already being sown.
So in 2005, facing a kind of sluggish stock price, Redstone makes this huge strategic move. He splits his kingdom in two. You had CBS Corporation, which would be the stable, cash-generating business, and then the new Viacom, with assets like Paramount and MTV, that would be the high-growth engine. The business logic was totally sound, but what it also did was create two distinct and sometimes competing centers of power.
And right at the heart of this empire was a deeply fractured family. The relationship between Sumner and his daughter, Shari, it was notoriously volatile. Court filings used words like tempestuous and said it was filled with antagonism. This personal conflict would become the fault line that the entire empire would one day start to tremble on.
Now, to protect his empire from this very family drama, Sumner had a clear succession plan. As you can see here, he set up a trust controlled by a majority of independent, non-family professionals, people like his longtime advisors, Philippe Dauman and George Abrams. The design was explicit, to prevent his children, and specifically Shari, from ever seizing control. He wanted his life's work run by seasoned executives, not by his heirs.
But plans, no matter how carefully you lay them, can be upended. As the years went by, the titan of Hollywood began to fade, and that created a power vacuum that would set the stage for the final, most dramatic act.
The contrast it's just jarring. The man who had once completely dominated boardrooms was by 2015 a shadow of his former self. Court documents paint this grim picture of a man who is physically incapacitated, unable to speak clearly, and entirely dependent on others for his most basic needs. The king was vulnerable.
Okay, so this brings us to a really critical legal concept, undue influence. It's basically when someone uses their power over a vulnerable person to get them to do things they wouldn't normally do. And in the legal battles to come, Redstone's own lawyers would eventually agree to a critical fact, that he was susceptible. That single admission, that the king was susceptible, that became the key that could unlock the entire kingdom. So with her father in a weakened state and the empire's future just hanging in the balance, Shari Redstone made her move. And the lawsuit that followed would paint a picture of a methodical, step-by-step campaign to seize the power her father had so long denied her.
The lawsuit laid out this four-part strategy. First, after years of being distant, Shari re-enters her father's life, taking control of his home. Then, according to the suit, she starts to isolate him, cutting off access to his old friends and colleagues. The third step was taking over his medical care, making him completely dependent on her. And finally, the endgame, using that newfound influence to have her father dismantle the very trust he had built to keep her out.
And this was the moment the coup became reality. Philippe Dauman, who was Viacom's CEO, and George Abrams, two of Sumner's closest confidants for decades, were just unceremoniously dismissed from the trust. The guardians of Sumner's own succession plan, they had been purged.
With her rivals removed from the trust, the balance of power shifted decisively. The long-estranged daughter was now positioned to become the most powerful person in her father's empire. It was checkmate.
The victory was complete. Shari Redstone, the same woman her father had once publicly dismissed in a letter to Forbes magazine, had won. She had outmaneuvered Viacom's CEO, and now she set her sights on her final rival for absolute control, the powerful head of CBS, Les Moonves.
As one investment banker so colorfully put it to the Los Angeles Times, the result was just brutal and decisive. Now, Moonves and the CBS board, they didn't go down without a fight. They even filed their own lawsuit to try and strip the Redstones of control. But in the end, it was Les Moonves who was forced out.
So when the dust finally settled, the terms of the peace treaty spelled out a near total victory for Shari. The lawsuit against her was dropped, and her opponents on the board were gone. In return, she offered one small concession, a temporary 2-year pause on her plans to merge CBS and Viacom. And for Les Moonves, the end was swift. He was out, his massive severance package frozen. Shari Redstone was now the undisputed power behind the throne.
And so, having secured control, Shari moved to fulfill her ultimate ambition, to reverse her father's 2005 decision and reunite the two halves of the media empire he had built. The restoration was at hand.
You know, when you look at the whole timeline, it's just an incredible story. From the conquest of Paramount back in '94, to that strategic split in '05, to her takeover of the trust in 2016, and the ousting of her rivals. By 2019, she'd achieved her goal, announcing the remerger of Viacom and CBS. The divided kingdom was whole again, just under new rule.
And all of this leaves us with a fascinating question for the future of media. Shari Redstone fought and won a brutal war to consolidate her family's control over this legacy media giant. But in an age that's dominated by behemoths like Netflix, Disney, and Amazon, is that kind of family dynasty a source of focused strength, or is it a potential vulnerability? It's the final unanswered question in this corporate Shakespearean tragedy, and the entire industry is waiting to see how it plays out.